Hey guys, my name is Mark. I'm one of the mechanics here for FLX. So let's say that you just got your step through 2. Will be a small video on how to assemble your bike. The tools you will need are as follows: a set of Allen wrenches, preferably up to 8mm. For me, I only have 6, so I'll get that 8mm later. A pedal wrench, some cable cutters for a lot of zip ties, some grease. This will be used for the pedal threads along with the seat tube of the frame to insert that seat post. Not needed, but highly recommended, is a torque wrench. When unboxing your bike, it will also come with an assortment of tools, an 8, a 15mm, along with some Allen wrenches and some zip ties. Now, when you open the box, you want to start by removing any loose packaging. This step through 2 is a touring kit edition, so it will come with fenders. They'll be loosely packaged in the box. You have the accessory box. This will have your display, your pedals, among other things like manuals and such. And then some loose packaging like some styrofoam to keep the bike from moving too much. So now the next step is to simply take the bike out of the box. So do keep in mind the saddle and the wheel are also zip tied to the frame. A second pair of hands, one person at each end, and then just pick up the bike. And everything should come in one, help balance it. And then you want to take your cable cutters and start snipping away at the zip ties. The first one that you want to start cutting are the zip ties keeping the wheel to the frame. When you're cutting the zip ties, you just want to be a little careful that you don't damage the frame or any components. You want to cut around the styrofoam. So we're making a mess here, but we'll clean it up later. And be sure when you are cutting these zip ties that you use a tool that isn't a box cutter, because a lot of the time the blade will cut through the styrofoam. And then as you cut the zip ties, you want to slowly start removing the styrofoam as well. So it's usually recommended to have a little box out to put all the zip ties and styrofoam in for now. And then in an event you have to return the bike for whatever reason, you want to make sure you save all the styrofoam for that exact reason. So to keep the bike standing on its own like that, the fork is angled in a way where it's nice and balanced. But ideally, you do want to have a second pair of hands to hold the bike to help prevent it from tipping over. So I'm going to leave the packaging material on the axle because installing the front wheel will be the last thing I do. And then the next step is to install the seat post. One of the easiest things to do. Ideally, you do want to add grease. This is to help the seat post glide in and out of the frame better and also help keep it from seizing in an event you haven't moved the seat post for a very long time. So you want to just apply a generous amount, not too much. That should be enough. And once you insert it into the frame, definitely want to spread that grease around. Take it back out, and using a cloth, just grabbing one out right here, just wipe off any excess. You can have the lock positioned either facing backwards or forward, as long as the gap here matches the one on the frame. As you can see, there's some paint coming off of that. And then tighten it up. So you have that cam lock right there, and that keeps it in place. Let's make it a little tighter, actually. So the cam lock, you should be able to have to apply some reasonable strength to close it. So from there, it could be just a little tighter. And I'm using my hands to tighten the other side. Oh, there we go. Yep, and that should be good. And then the next step is to get the bars on. So to make things easier, we do have a stand here we're gonna prop the bike on, but you can do everything regarding the assembly without a stand. You'll just have to have a second person kind of help you out with lifting up the frame to get the front wheel on. But having a stand or a work stand definitely makes the job much, much easier. So we'll just prop the bike onto the work stand to make life easier. And then we'll continue with the assembly. Cool, and as the bike is on the stand, the bike does have hydraulic brakes, so you wanna make sure that you don't put too much weight on the hydraulic lines. So I do have the bars kind of propped in specific areas so that doesn't happen. And then now I'll just continue clipping the zip ties and removing all the packaging. This is the touring package model. So it does come with fenders. It will come with a front and rear tail light, or front and rear light, sorry. Comes with a rack, and it does come with that suspension seat post as well. Cool. So we got the bike on the stand, and then the next step I'll be doing is installing the bars onto the bike. So in this case, you will need a 5mm Allen wrench, and you will need to remove the top cap, keeping the fork and headset in place. We're having some kind of mix up with the packaging. On the stickers that come on the spacers with some bikes are telling customers to remove all the spacers. What I'm saying is ignore that completely. You want at least 2 spacers on the bike. There should be a total of 6. There's 1. I'm gonna add another. And next would be the stem. And then using the 4mm wrench, I'm just going to loosely tighten the stem onto the steer tube of the fork just to keep it in place for now. And the next thing you want to do is loosen the pivot stem right here. There's a lever that you pull back and that opens, and that will reveal the handlebar clamp adjustment bolt right there, and then that will also reveal the bolt inside the stem for that to tighten on the star nut of the fork. Once you open that up, you want to loosen the stem again and hold the fork in place using another hand or a helper. I think I got it. Yeah. I believe the top cap bolt should be a 5. And then you want to start threading that into the star nut inside the fork, and that will keep everything nice and sandwiched. So you don't want that top cap too tight, about 3 or 4 Newton meters, and that's where the torque wrench comes in. So just have it set to about 3 Newton meters, and once it clicks, you should be good. But since I've done this quite a few times, I'm just gonna go by feel, and it's still a little loose. So I'll go ahead and just tighten a little more here. Sometimes it's easier if you have a larger tool. So I'm just gonna take out my tri-tool. This is a tri-tool. It just makes the job a little easier. All right, and then once you have that top cap bolt tightened, then you wanna check for play. For me, it's really solid, and now you want to just loosely tighten the pinch bolts on the stem. You don't want to tighten them fully because we still need to align the bars with the wheel that we will install last. And then next is the clamp, keeping the handlebar in place, just a little tighter. So you have that adjustment in the back here. So this will tighten the clamp once it's closed. And then once I close the clamp, it should require a reasonable amount of force, and that should be good for now. I'm just gonna open it back up once we have the bike fully assembled and readjust everything to how I would ride the bike. But right now, that's good. We got the bars on. The next step is going to be installing the pedals. It's gonna be in that accessory box that we took out of the big box earlier. So in this box, you'll have manuals and contact information, your charger, your pedals, an assortment of tools, reflectors, and zip ties. Your phone holder, this will be coming with the touring package model only, along with your display, which is in this tiny box right here. Or the next thing, that we're gonna be installing are the pedals. And before you thread them in, you wanna make sure which one is left and which one is right. So WR, this is the right. WL, that's left. And it is very important that you thread the pedal in the correct crank. And then you do want to add just a bit of grease. That's good enough. And an easy way to remember how they're threaded in, so you take the appropriate pedal, so this is the left one. So when installing the left pedal onto the left crank, it is the direction of the front wheel. So I am threading counterclockwise, the direction of the front wheel. So in this case, it is going to be counterclockwise on this side, and you can actually essentially pedal backwards, and it'll tighten just like that. And you want to take your pedal wrench, or a 15mm, just like that. And you want to make sure it's tightened so the pedal doesn't loosen as you ride the bike. And I'm going to be doing the same thing on the other side. So we have the right labeled WR, and we have the right crank. I am threading towards the direction of the front wheel. So in this case, it's going to be clockwise, just like that. And now that I have it threaded, I can just go like that. And I can tighten it using the pedal wrench. And that should be good. So we got the pedals installed, the bars are loosely installed, and the next is going to be the front wheel. So I'm just gonna finish up removing the packaging, the little protective caps, and they should pop out just like that. It may require some force. As you can see, this is already broken, most likely from shipping. So unfortunately in this case, the plastic cap did end up staying inside of the axle. So this may happen to some of you guys out there. Luckily, it's a through axle, so it's hollow. I'm just gonna use a really long screwdriver to kind of punch it out. Screwdriver, and just punched it right out. So we have the through axle right here. We have the cam lock on this side, and a nut that you loosen. There's a clover that kind of shrinks as you push the nut in after you loosen it, just like that. And it slides out just like that. So when installing the front wheel, you do have to remove the spacer, which is keeping, or the spacer inside the caliper, which is keeping the pads from closing. And that can happen if you accidentally pull the lever. And because it's hydraulic, if the pads are closed, it will stay like that, and you do have to force it open. What I like to do in an event that does happen, you will have to get, I like to use a pry bar. Really wide flathead screwdriver will also do the trick. When you end up using these tools, you do want to make sure that it is 100% clean of any grease or debris. Even if you touch it, that can contaminate it. So you want to first clean it with rubbing alcohol and then get in there and spread the pads. You want to do it very carefully and just be patient with it. But in this case, the spacer stayed in place like it was supposed to, and I just have to pull it out, and you can tell that there's a good gap between those pads. And then from there, pretty self-explanatory, just slides right in, just line everything up. So ideally, when installing the through axle, you want the cam lock on the opposite side of the rotor. That way, if you ever want to remove the wheel, your hands aren't all over this area where you could potentially contaminate the rotor. And then from there, you want to position the cam lock up, and to make sure everything's nice and tight, there's that nut at the end. So I'm tightening it just enough to where once I close the cam lock, there's some reasonable strength there, or required to close it. So right now it's a bit too tough, and that would be perfect. Just make sure that when you are closing everything, so that the clover is fully expanded just like that. And then you want to tighten it. And that should be good. The next thing I'm going to do is just fasten or tighten the rack onto the frame. And then on the rack, there is a small plastic bag with 2 bolts that I'm going ahead and free. I'm just going to be a little careful here. Should be good. And then these bolts will be going here. As you can see, there's a hole and a bolt hole right there. Just line it up, tighten the bolts down. Just be extra careful that you don't cross thread these bolts, mainly because they're being threaded into the frame. And if you do end up damaging the bolt holes on the frame, I hate to say it, but you're kind of out of luck there. So you want to be extra careful. These should be 4mm, so I'm going to use my tri-tool. So you kind of want to loosely thread it with your fingers. So right there is pretty good, or loosely tighten it down. And you want to get to I'm going to go ahead and thread in the other side as well. So keep in mind that racks in a general sense aren't always 100% aligned with the frame, which in this case, I'm going to have to muscle it in place just a little. And this is the reason why you want to loosely thread in the bolts first before you tighten everything down. Okay, so I'm tightening the bolts onto the rack. In this case, I did kind of have to muscle it in place. The 2 bolts on the top of the rack are already threaded in for you from the factory, but for me, I did have to loosen them slightly to get the rack properly aligned. So you may have to do that, you may not. So if you're having issues threading in the lower bolts of the rack, you may want to slightly loosen the 2 top bolts, and you should be pretty squared away from there. And then just don't forget to tighten all 4 bolts, and your rack's properly installed. So we got the headlight over here. I carefully removed the packaging from it. Again, this will only come if you have the touring kit model. So I'm just gonna let that dangle a little. Right there is fine. And that will be installed on the lowers of the fork, right in this area. And you have a bolt that threads through. And there's I believe this is a 10mm nut that keeps it in place. So I'm just gonna go ahead and remove this real quick. So the nut's on the back, I'm just using the wrench to keep it in place. Cool, so you can just keep that bolt in there. Let me take out that washer, set it aside for now. So just to get an idea, the light will be installed like this. And you can angle it any way you want. So it can be installed like this, and then there's another way you can also install it like this if you like. So in front of the lowers of the fork, gotta remove that bolt, which is like oddly hard to remove for some reason. If you install it in the front like that, they'll give you more of an angle to set the light at. And then we just thread the nut back, or the washer, and then the nut back in to the rear. Just like that. We have the 10mm, keep the nut in place. And then the bolt is 5. Get it nice and tight just a bit. Reposition that. Get it nice and tight. And that should be good. Open it here. And you also need a floor pump, preferably with a gauge that is compatible with Schrader valves. So we're gonna go inflate the tires next. The next thing we're gonna do is inflate the tires. So we locate the valve. I've already unscrewed the cap. And the next thing you want to locate is the minimum and maximum PSI of the tire. So in this case, minimum being 50, maximum being 85 PSI. And then if you use bar, 35259. So I'm inflating the tires. Just as a recap, it's anywhere between 50 to 85. Tire pressure is mainly preference. The lower tire pressure, you get more grip, but you also have more of a risk of punctures, and you also wear down the tire faster by doing so. By running higher, you get less grip, but you don't wear down as fast, but it's also not as comfortable too. So in this case, I'm just pump it up to max, which is 85. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, just like that. Work them arms. Now the tires shift don't come fully inflated, mainly so that they fit in the box properly and so that they also don't somehow explode due to elevation change. So as you're inflating the tire, you may hear some pops and pings. That is the bead of the tire seating onto the rim. That's completely normal. And to make sure that the tire is inflated properly, if you want to get a close-up of this, there's a little line right here that's on the tire itself. Hopefully you can see that on the camera. But you need to be able to see that on both sides all the way around the wheel. So now that we got the tires inflated, the next thing you want to do is align the bars and stem with the wheel. By doing so, you want to first loosen the pinch bolts of the stem. From there, you should have full motion just like that. And there's two ways of doing this. You can eyeball it, the stem with the wheel. The way I like to do it is lining up the handlebars with the top of the fork. So there should be equal distance between the tops of the fork to the handlebars. And once you get that lined up, go ahead and tighten these. These should be, if you're using the torque wrench, at 7 Newton meters. But from here, I'll just go by feel. And once you're done, you want to check your work. Be sure they're nice and tight, just like that. Then the next thing I'm going to do is kind of position the bars where I want them. Where they're at right now is pretty okay, but in case you want to reposition them yourselves, there's that lever that you pull or towards yourself. And then the lock opens, and you can reposition the bars as such. Do keep in mind there is a bolt here for tension. So right now it's fairly tight, but you do want to close the clamp with some force, so it shouldn't be too easy. So here's an example. So let's say it's too loose. It shouldn't be that easy to close it. Or if after you close it, the bars still move around, you want to make sure it's of reasonable tightness. And do keep in mind, by doing so, you will kind of mess up bars just a little, but that's normal, as long as you don't do it too much. So that's about good. And then you want to check your work. What I like to do is kind of just hit them down like that. If they move at all by doing that, it's too loose, and you want to repeat the process by tightening that bolt. The next thing I want to demonstrate is how to remove and install the battery. So once you receive the bike, you'll have the keys, which will be zip tied to the lines up front. And then you have the keyhole right here. So that's locked. Horizontal would be, actually, if you were to twist it, let's say half a turn counterclockwise, that would be fully open. And then there is a lever on the bottom here. So once the key is in its open position, you'll kind of be able to kind of move the battery around. There's a safety latch right here that you also have to open, just like that. And the battery just comes just out. And then when installing it, you want to do the bottom first, just like that, and it just pops right in. And then if you want to come around, open, locked, and that's it. Next thing we're going to be doing is installing the display, which will be mounted onto the bars, just like that. The connection of the display, it's going to be connected right there. It's green and triangular in shape with 5 pins. This is female. And then there's also another connection here, which is yellow, circular, and male. This is for an optional throttle that is sold separately. So what most people do if they don't have a throttle, they kind of just like leave it tucked in and just forget about it. So when installing the display, I'll just keep it nice and short. There is a bolt right there. I believe that's a 3mm. So once you unscrew that, the clamp opens and you can just clamp it onto the handlebar just as such. Same thing goes for the buttons of the display. You remove that bolt, clamp opens. Ideally, you kind of want it mounted right here. That connection is connected into the display, so purple, purple, just like that. and the connection to the display from the bike goes in just like that. And you want to make sure that they're fully seated. Sometimes they may appear to be seated, but can actually be pushing further. A lot of the times, like for example, they can look like that, but you can actually push it in just a little more, and you should be good. So when tightening the display onto the bars along with the button, you want to make sure that they're tight enough to where they don't move around, but not too tight to where if you try to reposition them, you can at all. So right here, it requires some reasonable strength to reposition it, but not too much. So I would say that's about good tightness. If you have a torque wrench, it's going to be about 2 Newton meters. And when installing the display, in this case, you will need to use the rubber shims, which is included. That guy right there. It goes over just like that. Oop. That should be good. And then just so you guys can see, purple to purple, green to green. Might have to rotate the display just a little there. And you should be good. And using the zip ties, you can kind of tidy everything up. But just for the sake of time, we'll just keep it like that for now. And then just make sure everything turns on properly. We should be good there. So last but not least, you just want to go over your bike, check all the bolts, all the nuts, make sure everything's nice and tight. So I'm going to be doing that right now. But basically that's what you want to do before you go on your test ride. Make sure you get the cranks and the chain rings and all that cool stuff, and you should be good. Now, when going on the ride, your bike may not shift right. You may hear rubbing from the brake pads, which is kind of like a metal sound. There are other videos on YouTube guiding you on how to make those proper adjustments. We're not going to do them here just because they can take a lot of time to do so. But like I said, our friends at Park Tool, they have some really great videos on how to adjust your derailleur, how to make sure that your bike is shifting properly, how to make sure that your pads are not rubbing against the rotor as you ride your bike. But yeah, other than that, you should be good. If for whatever reason you don't feel comfortable making those adjustments yourself, any bike shop can do it for you. A derailleur adjustment, roughly $15 to $20. Brake adjustments can range anywhere between like 10, 30, or 40 for simple stuff like brake rub. And that's about it. And then I just wanted to cover some small things here. We got the bell, the phone holder for a touring package model, and then your reflectors. So we have the bell here that just kind of clamps onto the bars as such. It's pretty self-explanatory, and the position is really dependent on where you want it. The reflectors can be a little tricky. So this particular one will be going onto the bars, and that will be the white reflector. And they kind of snap into place as such. And then as an example, it goes in just like that. And then you can use these screws to kind of tighten everything together as such. And then you have the red one, snaps in, just like that, onto the seat post, just like that. And then last but not least, we got the phone holder for those who got the touring package. So there's 2 bolts keeping everything together. And depending on where you mount the phone holder, you may need to use some rubber shims. And these guys go on the inside just like that. These also help keep the bar protected so that the mount doesn't mess it up. And just to get an idea, you can mount it just like that. Cool.
All right.
And don't forget about your fenders if you order the touring package. So it's gonna make this really fast. So they're going to be mounting onto the fork just like that. So the smaller one mounts onto the fork, and then you have these. But essentially, there's these hooks that keep the rubber strap in place, just like that. And you want to tension it, just like that. There's 2 on each side, so a total of 4. And then the rear will be exactly the same. We'll be mounting onto the seat stays of the bike, so on these bars right here. Okay, so I almost forgot to mention, so the adjustment bolt for the stem, you can also pivot the stem up and down once that bolt is loose, so as such. And then you can tighten it to whatever desired position. and then clamp it down just like that, and you should be good. My name is Mark. I'm one of the mechanics here, and thank you for watching.